He even gave her a vagina like that. The doctor herself, the psychiatrist, had a nervous breakdown. She sees a hairy figure, some kind of beast that's here, to which the doctor says, "And where is it?" His favorite sculpture was simply a vagina. He sculpted vaginas out of bread and... Hello, welcome to another episode of Criminality Patrol. The courts decide what will happen to the suspect, to the one who committed such a crime. That's what I thought, and there's really nothing groundbreaking about it. That's what I thought, but I went through the recent cases that happened in Poland, the cases we talked about, cruel crimes, murders, and it turns out that's not entirely the case. Very often, more and more often it seems, what happens to such a criminal, a person who has killed, is not decided by judges, but by experts. Experts in forensic psychiatry. It is they who actually determine whether the person who killed the criminal was at the time of committing the act or the crime. He was sane and can be held responsible for it. And more often it turns out that they determine he is not sane. In that case, he cannot go to prison, and in this situation, he can only undergo psychiatric treatment.
Can a criminal pretend to be insane so convincingly that he can even fool the court? That's not a question from a thriller. It's a question that Duncan Harding faces every day as a forensic psychiatrist. In his book, Forensic Psychiatrist: How Criminals Fake Mental Illness, he takes us behind the scenes of evaluations that are rarely discussed. Evaluations that determine whether the accused will go to prison or to a psychiatric hospital. Serial killers, psychopaths, but also children and drugs. Teenagers who committed cruel crimes. The author of the book evaluated all of them and asked himself the same difficult question: is it an illness or a calculated game with the system? If you're interested not only in what happened, but above all why, this book is for you. No sensationalism. Instead, it's a reliable, at times unsettling analysis of how the human mind works when confronted with the law. The book Forensic Psychiatrist will be published in Poland by Feria on April 8th. You'll find the link to it in the description. Watch special episodes as well as regular episodes without ads on herohero.co/criminality-patrol.
When I was still the head of the investigative unit in Nowa Huta, we handled a case like that. These were two neighbors who had always argued with each other. These arguments later turned into such hatred that one day one of them, Stanisław, that was his name, wanted to kill the other, to kill him with an axe. Fortunately, he didn't succeed. The other man escaped, but it became an attempted murder case. At the moment when he was arrested, Stanisław stopped speaking altogether. He stopped talking, he didn't say anything, he didn't react. He ended up in a psychiatric hospital and spent over a year in that psychiatric hospital. He was observed there, he was treated there, and for a year he was completely unresponsive. He didn't say a single word. The only way to move him was to push him, then he would sit down. Basically, a person you couldn't communicate with at all. After more than a year, the experts concluded that this person had suffered such a mental breakdown, a permanent mental breakdown. And he is simply mentally ill. This condition was probably going to last for the rest of his life. When they decided he was harmless, that he could leave the psychiatric institution, he returned home and immediately started speaking. He told his wife that he would like to reconcile with his neighbor, the one he had always argued with. In fact, his wife went to that neighbor and told him that it was true. He said, "Well, then come on Sunday." So they went on Sunday. So they crossed the threshold of that house. The neighbor who welcomed him got a bit emotional. He says, "Neighbor, after all these years, we'll finally have peace." And suddenly he pulls an axe out from under his coat, shouts, "There will be no peace," and he just hits him on the head. Fortunately, he survived again because those women somehow saved him. But the fact is that this man didn't say a word for over a year. For over a year, he pretended to be mentally ill, carrying that revenge in his heart the whole time. And as soon as he got the chance, he simply went out and wanted to finish what he had planned over a year earlier. He just wanted to kill his neighbor. Well, it seems that none of the doctors realized that he was just faking, pretending, and simply fooling them. Recently, I got my hands on a book. It's a book by Dr. Harding, a man who spent his whole life working in forensic psychiatry. He wrote a book called Forensic Psychiatrist about how criminals fake mental illness. It's important because he's not someone who just studied this academically or is currently involved in it. He's actually a practitioner who spent his whole life working with people who committed serious crimes, and he had to make judgments as a forensic psychiatrist. Whether these people can really be held responsible for it, whether at the moment they committed these crimes, they were aware of what they were doing. And he worked with them on a daily basis. He worked in London in several institutions that dealt with this. And he describes exactly this type of case. He had a case of, well, a man with a familiar sounding surname, Radzinski. Todd Radzinski. He was suspected of rapes, of attempting to kill someone. He was handed over by another court-appointed expert who said that he was experiencing a severe psychosis. Psychosis means a complete detachment from reality, combined with various kinds of hallucinations, voices, something that urges such a person, among other things, to commit a crime. Well, it seemed that this man was truly mentally ill, that basically there was no hope for him anymore and nothing could help him. And Dr. Harding describes how he sat down with him. They start talking, and at some point Radzinski says that he sees a hairy figure, some kind of beast that's here. So the doctor asks, "Where is it?" "It's on the ceiling. Don't you see its huge teeth?" Normally a person would turn around and look. However, the doctor didn't turn around, and then he noticed a mocking smirk at the corner of Todd's mouth, and it occurred to him that he was simply faking his mental illness. So he started examining him, observing him for many months, and subjected him to various tests. And it turned out that indeed Radzinski was faking all of it, that he was pretending. In reality, he is an aggressive man, but he is fully aware of everything he does. Well, probably if it weren't for that moment when he noticed his smirk, he would have considered him mentally ill, and Radzinski would have simply ended up in an institution for treatment instead of getting a sentence. So that kind of convinces me that saying someone is mentally ill and at the same time saying they can't be held criminally responsible is a big problem. And of course the question is whether it always works out. I'm also wondering what has changed in the approach to forensic psychiatry. When we look at these cases in Poland, those well-known cases from the past, the 1990s, the 2000s, well, it seems that the approach was completely different. Leszek Pękalski, known as the Vampire of Bajtów, one of the most famous Polish murderers, the son of an alcoholic, a farm worker, somewhere out there on a state farm. His mother didn't want him, his grandmother tried to raise him, and then he was sent to an orphanage. You just had to look at him to see that there was something wrong with this man. Besides, he was diagnosed with intellectual disability. He liked to travel by train. He liked to walk in the forest. During one of those walks, he met a young girl, Sylvia, raped her and killed her. Later, he was charged with another rape. In total, they tried to prove many crimes of this type against him, simply cruel murders. Some people said he killed about 70 or 90 people. Well, basically nothing came of it. The prosecutor's office tried to conclusively prove 17 such crimes against him. It ended up being 2, meaning 1 murder of Sylvia, that young girl, and a rape of another woman. Despite the fact that he was found to have intellectual disabilities as well as sexual disorders, he was convicted. He was sentenced to 25 years in prison. His sentence ended in 2017, so as we can see, almost 10 years ago. Despite this, he did not get out. He ended up in the center in Gostinin, and he is still there. Well, today he is only, so to speak, 60 years old, so he could still live for quite a while. Despite all this, despite the fact that only a part of the crimes he committed was probably proven, he will basically spend the rest of his life there because I think there is no other alternative for him anymore. For the rest of his life, he will be isolated from society. Another such killer, or a man known as a murderer, is Pavel Tuklin, known as the Scorpion. Well, Pavel Tuklin, who was also suspected of at least several dozen murders of this kind, he hated women. He himself came from a dysfunctional family. His father was a drunk. There were 11 children. He was the 8th child. He was treated very harshly by his parents, among other things because even as a boy he would wet himself. He was ashamed of it, but it was some kind of curse for him. He started murdering women, and he said that when he killed, he simply felt better. In total, he was proven to have committed 9 murders. 10 attempted murders, and he confessed to 10. Later in the courtroom, he withdrew his confession and said that the militia had forced him to make those statements. But he was under observation for a long time in a psychiatric hospital in Szczecin. There he came to the conclusion that he had some kind of artistic talent, that he could sculpt. He sculpted with bread and saliva. He came to the conclusion that it was a good artistic medium. But his favorite sculpture was simply a vagina. He sculpted vaginas out of bread and saliva. Do you hear how that sounds? He even decorated some of them with real hair. I would say it's terrible because from all of this you can see that this is a person who had mental disorders. You don't have to be a psychiatrist to see that this person was really in a bad state. By the way, on top of all this, he wrote to the doctor, to the psychiatrist who was observing him. He told her not to underestimate him because only with him could she feel like she was dealing with a real man. He even gave her a vagina-shaped gift. The doctor herself, the psychiatrist, had a nervous breakdown. So even a person who was theoretically prepared for this couldn't handle who they were dealing with. That is, with a person who seemed to be completely mentally ill. Despite all of this, Tuklin was sentenced to death. The State Council did not grant clemency and the sentence was carried out. He was hanged in May 1987. Siódmego roku. Another very well-known cruel criminal, Mariusz Trinkiewicz, because of whom the law was changed, a murderer of 4 little boys. He was also sentenced. He was even sentenced to death, but since the death penalty was no longer carried out, he received 25 years under amnesty. His sentence also ended. He served his time. He also ended up in that facility in Gostinin, where he died in January last year, that is 2025. And look, all these cruel murderers, criminals, despite what would seem to be obvious mental problems, were convicted. They got a sentence, they were convicted. After serving their sentence, they ended up in the facility in Gostinin. In Gostinin, it would seem obvious in such a situation that someone gets a sentence and then, if necessary, is treated afterwards. So I asked what has changed in this approach to forensic psychiatry to deciding whether someone is sane or not. There are certainly more of these cases. There aren't any statistics, at least I couldn't find any. The only statistics I found are from 2008, showing that in 2008 there were about 500 over 500 such cases where someone was found not criminally responsible. But in 2014 there were already twice as many of these cases. I don't know, I tried to find it, I don't see any statistics, although from conversations and from following all these stories and cases, it's clear that there are definitely more of them. Do you remember a year ago, this is an exceptionally shocking case that we talked about, the murder at the University of Warsaw? Mieszko, who took an axe and brutally killed an employee of that university, a front desk attendant. He also tried to kill the security guard. It was May 2025. It hasn't even been a year since the court-appointed doctors found him legally insane. So this case will no longer be considered by the court. There will be no court verdict. But Mieszko will undergo treatment. He will be sent to a psychiatric facility for treatment. Similarly, the story of Michał, who hit 22 people on Monciak in Sopot. Similarly, the story of Remigiusz, who brutally beat his 3-year-old daughter. And we could list many such cases. And of course, for the person who did this, it has enormous significance. There is no verdict. He is sent to a psychiatric facility. The treatment may last 5 to 10 years. But there is a chance that at some point the doctors will decide that this person is healthy and can be released. He will not be held responsible for what he did. He recovers and returns to society. And of course, there's another question. Do those people who have diminished capacity at the moment of committing the act not realize it? It's some kind of psychosis. Is it increasing? Well, it's not out of the question. We've often talked about how people's mental condition is getting worse and worse. That we're getting more and more people who attack and kill without any clear reason. And certainly what's been happening for many years now is causing the number of such people to increase. On the other hand, just like it has been so far, most of these people have been sentenced. And when their sentences ended, they were sent to this center, or a branch of this center in Gostinin. Is it that Mieszko is, I would say, a criminal? Although it's hard to call him a criminal because he can't be held criminally responsible. He's a bit different, a young guy studying law, whose father is also a lawyer and whose mother works at a university. Maybe it was easier for them to prove that he was really acting under some kind of psychosis, that this person needs treatment. So the question remains, how many of these cases will there be? Are these really things that have been definitively determined? As I told you at the beginning, saying that someone is mentally ill is not that simple, it's not that obvious. It's a kind of game, I think, between the doctor or doctors who examine and observe and the person who did it. And you can't rule out that sometimes this game between them works in favor of the one who killed. Well, in a formal sense, of course, it's also the case that when the experts determine that someone is insane, that he can't be held responsible because he was in a state of, for example, some kind of psychosis, then the prosecutor is obliged to submit a motion to the court to discontinue the proceedings. And the court has to decide whether the proceedings will actually be discontinued. But which court would decide otherwise? On what basis? With what knowledge? It's obvious from the start that the court can only agree with such a motion. As I said, these are questions, many of these questions remain open. This is a kind of, I would say, problem that has probably emerged only in recent years. There is a question of whether we are able to effectively deal with the statement that someone was insane at the time of committing the crime. Can we be 100% sure about this and determine that it was really the case and that this person needs to be treated, not punished? There are certain doubts here. Since there are doubts, there is also the question of whether this kind of situation, when someone goes to a psychiatric hospital instead of prison and is released after a few years. Isn't it, in a way, a bit of circumventing the law? That's all, of course, referring to what I said about Dr. Harding. About this man who, as a practitioner, observed people like this for many years. As he himself stated, it's not easy, and he found out for himself that it's possible for an expert psychiatrist to simply be deceived. And that's it for today's episode. Of course, subscribe to our channel, and as always, take care.
Watch special episodes as well as regular episodes without ads at herohero.co Criminalny Patrol.